Hello and welcome to Wines and Vines with myself, Christopher Mark. This episode is sponsored by Vintality, a precision viticulture company to help you enhance your soil, your vineyard, and how that connects to your winemaking. When not terroir mapping or in a soil pit, you'll also find Vintality now selling trellising, things like spreaders, stakes, as well as affordable European posts, and a few other things. You can find them at vintality.com, where you also can find a free newsletter, which is theoretically weekly, has become somewhat monthly, with resources, news, information, tools, and tips and tricks and all kinds of other things to be of service to the wine industry. This episode is something of an emergency podcast during the interregnum between our first and long-promised second season, which I would really like to get out in 2024. We just seem to be far too busy all the time. But for those who are maybe listening who are unaware or are in the future, this is January 2024, and we've been hit by a very severe cold snap. At my own home, we hit minus 30, but more importantly, in many vineyards, or really all vineyards, I've seen numbers of negative 24 and a half, 25, 26, 27, even colder in Vernon. And so I just wanted to, along with many others, get out some timely information on climate modeling, what we can expect weather-wise, bud hardiness and vine hardiness, and just have a short to the point discussion. So you'll find that with Ben-Min of the Summerland Research Center and Andy Nadler of Peak Hydromet. I'm just really wanting to pull out some key information, provide a bit of data. Just, again, hope this is helpful as we're grappling with what's happened. So take a listen, and please, if you enjoy, share, and whatever else you need to do. Thank you. Okay. My name is Christopher Mark with Vintality, and we're going to be talking about, obviously, some of the cold damage and extreme colds we've seen here in the Okanagan of British Columbia and how that impacts us. And then farmers and vineyards, I think, even further afield. With me today, going in alphabetical order, I have Andy Nadler, who is an agricultural meteorologist, PAG, who's also the owner and operator of Peak Hydromet Solutions, a full-service environmental monitoring company, all kinds of soil and weather stations and all kinds of fun stuff. We've done lots of great work together. As well, I have Ben-Min Chang, research scientist at the Summerland R&D Center, who's also comes from previously Washington State with obviously the very well-known Marcus Keller and many other high-end scientists. He's been doing great work, including on the environmental side, bud hardiness, things like that. And I just want to say, kind of from all of us in the industry, to both of you, really appreciate the work you've been sharing. I think seeing all that, and it's been very helpful to people if some of the data is not super optimistic. So Ben, I thought we would start with you and maybe just kind of talk about, as you've been sharing, what you've been seeing at Summerland in terms of bud numbers and kind of where we're at, and maybe then also a bit of an background explanation for how to understand that data.
Yeah, so what I have seen is I deal with cold hardness, right? So actually they behave very well this year. They pretty much reached to the potential cold hardness level, even though people worry about that we have a kind of warm December, right? But we were tracking them super closely. They actually reacclimate to the maximum level just within a week. So that part, I think the plants did their best. And the rest was the weather. And basically after last Friday and the Saturday cold snap, and we already dissect some bunch of buds and seeing nothing living there. Yeah, that's pretty devastating. And also the temperature level actually dropped to the level that might actually damage the xylem, which means that might kill the trunk. And this is the topic I really worry about right now. Yeah.
And that's just because then it's purely a matter of you to get that cold. Obviously, then we're not just giving up potentially a crop this year. The plant, you're full replanting for those plants.
Yeah, basically just last year we had a cold snap, but that pretty much just destroy the crop only. But this year we have to worry about we might need to replant the whole plant. Yeah, that's the implication. Yeah.
Ben, I'm curious, with actual plant damage, when does that exhibit itself? Like how long till growers know what the actual damage is? Would this be like into the growing season, or will they start to know sooner?
There is actually a technique to do the trunk dissection, but that will open kind of like a big wound. You might introduce a pathogen into your trunk. So that's sometimes a grower kind of hesitant to do that, but that's probably the quickest way you can know what's roughly the percentage of trunk damage.
So they don't want to cut down their vine to see if it's alive.
You actually don't have to chop down the whole vine. This is like crack a tiny window. But yeah, I know that's risky, but yeah. There's actually Washington State University in their extension article talks about cold damage assessment. They actually offer some kind of a method, and you can minimize the required sample. Basically, what they say is you start with the cold pocket where you might expecting the lots of damage. You start there. If you see some damage, yeah, they are there. Basically, that's the message. So,
right.
And besides that, then we probably have to wait until the growing season. But during the growing season, we will probably still see buds pushing at a certain level, right? But we wouldn't really see the so-called the vine collapsing until later in the summer when the water demand is super high. And they will show us, okay, my damage is basically half destroyed, so I couldn't keep it up, right? So
a vine might actually go into spring looking okay, and then it's mid-season where they actually see that it's that there's more damage done than one may have thought.
Right. So that's very tricky.
And given the level of bud damage, so obviously we're expecting to see much smaller crops. Is that even going to be that visible, right? So if the plants are already unhealthy this season just because of bud damage, how visible would that vine collapse, say in August, July, August, something like that even be?
I have no idea. Yeah, really depends, right? Depends on the coming summer, if that's a hot summer, unfortunately, and if that's also have a drought companion with that, yeah, that'd be scary.
And then in terms of your bud dissections, you've obviously seen really, maybe you want to share just a little bit on the data, what you guys have been doing and what you've been seeing in terms of the bud dissections you've done at this stage.
Yeah, so on our experimental station, we have a Malort, and initially I just expecting 50% of damage because when the cold snap coming, the maximum LT50 was at a minus 22, and we pretty much get a minus 22 temperature. So that's my expectation. However, I forgot to deal with the long-term exposure thing. So we had a 57 hours of long-term exposure under minus 18 degrees Celsius. So that actually further killed a bunch of the buds. So eventually, basically seeing no living primary, no secondary, no tertiary buds alive. Yeah.
And then kind of obviously it's very varietal specific, and I want to get into some of that, but kind of in terms of both those metrics, so both in terms of hitting extreme cold, and thinking just for people who are listening, watching, and again, Ben and other sources, Washington, for example, has some great resources on varietal specific data. But kind of on average, what would you say is the extreme cold threshold, at which point we expect to see a high LT50, which obviously is where we expect 50% of primary buds to die? And then in terms of that threshold for length of time at a shorter cold, slightly warmer cold, what is that threshold? Again, very roughly, knowing there's obviously a lot of varietal difference.
Right. So generally speaking, I will say 15 minutes for those published LT50. That's sufficient to kill the buds. But with those long-term exposure one, for example, we actually holding at a -18. The Malort, because their primary bug could survive for 6 hours in that condition. Let me take a look at the data. And for that secondary, well, they can bear for 10 hours, but apparently what we went through was way longer than those numbers.
Like almost 2 or 3 days below -18. Correct?
Yes.
And then maybe Andy, turning to you. So what have we actually seen? So obviously we have all these weather stations that you've been sharing data from. Obviously, really appreciate the government ministry has put up, which has been very helpful. So maybe if you want to share kind of both what we've seen in terms of actual temperatures and ranges.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let me show you some of the reports that have been going out. A lot of people who subscribe to them have been getting this in their email. And just for some background, these stations, there's 25 of them throughout the Okanagan. These were installed this past summer, mostly for tree fruit, for decision support on the tree fruit. But of course, a good weather station can be used for a lot of things. So it's, I think this is great that we can use them for different purposes. So this data is provincial data, so it's a great resource. So if you can see the report here, I think this was one of the coldest overnight periods. So this would be basically the 24-hour period before January 14th. You can see some of the lows from north to south. Some of the north ones, they got pretty close to 30, -30, which is very cold, especially for that region. And then as you go south, well, definitely some cold pockets, Karamios, the Smilkameen area, pretty close to -30 as well, Costin. But then down into the Soyuz area, kind of that -23, -24. So kind of a typical north-south spread. But definitely nobody was spared of the cold weather during this period. Now, I do want to show another visual here. I think this maybe speaks to what Ben was talking about in terms of the durations of cold weather. So this is the same information. I'm going to zoom in a little bit if I can. Same information, but presented a little bit differently. So if we look actually just on the overview, what it's showing is the red areas are the time frame. So this goes from January 11th to January 15th, the end of the 15th. So it's over that 4-day period that kind of was that really cold time. So the red are the areas that are below -21. So those are the areas where the temperature stayed below. The orange areas are below -18. The yellow areas are below -15, and then the gray are above -15. So this, you can really see the duration. So if we take, let's just go down to say one of the, say South Okanagan here in Osoyoos, so you can see actually Oliver South here, you can see that the temperature dipped below -15 around the 11th, just few hours into the day, but then that -18 that you were talking about, Ben. So there's the 11th at about 7:30. It dropped down. You can see it stayed down and basically stayed down until roughly about the 14th at 6 in the morning. So quite a long duration. But then we also have during that time, it actually dropped below that -21 as well. So in this case, it's showing 12 hours below -21. So there's Oliver there. Soyuz North, very similar. You can see all of them are very, very similar in terms of that duration of the really cold temperatures. So all of them around that 12 and a half hours, dip below that -20, 21. Same with Karamios, a little bit longer. Summerland area, as you can see, a little bit longer still. Plus there was that previously that other dip. So you actually had two sort of prolonged periods of that -21. And then as you get further north, it just it didn't even warm up. You look at, say, Winfield, so some of these areas around Vernon, we're seeing a day and a half. So one day 13 hours, one day 15 hours. So quite a long time, just extended freezing. So definitely a very very severe cold snap.
Yeah, That looks cold. And just for those who are listening, Andy's just sharing some effectively bar charts showing how very cold it got. And yeah, so then so we've really pushed. And so from Ben-Min, one question I had specifically kind of on that temperature threshold. So again, noting that there's obviously significant varietal differences in cold hardiness. On average, would you say minus 21 is roughly could we consider that kind of an average threshold that we're going to see significant bud death, primary bud death below that temperature?
I think minus 21 might cause about 10%. If they only experience 50 minutes, that will be 10% damage, right? But overall, I think the LT50 or the average LT50 now was at minus 23. So they actually did really well.
And so but then if we're at minus 21, obviously over an hour, if we're hitting that over an hour or 2 hours.
That still doesn't matter. Yeah.
One follow-up question I had, Ben, was just around kind of thinking in the future, the time to hit. So when you're saying that they really hit that cold hardiness, now was that in approaching the cold? Like when did you actually really see the vines here hit that max cold hardiness?
I think we did the closest one was maybe a couple of days before the cold snap. Yeah, that one shows really good data.
Okay. And so that started as we started to enter the cold. Like, was that an extended period of hardening off? Was that, over many months consistent, or did as we started to hit that longer cold, the vines really hardened off and aggressively acclimated?
It's a gradual change, but during the last phase, they still have ability to kind of jump up maybe a couple of degrees and going back again. Yeah, so they kind of fine tunes over that short period. That's something they can do. Yeah, but overall, it takes months, decreasing from minus 10 to minus 20. Yeah.
So then, do you think one of the questions I've had is obviously last year when we had the cold, which was not as severe, but obviously we had a late harvest in a lot of areas. This year, obviously, our harvest was extremely early. So obviously in your data, were you seeing that? Is that reflected in the data from your perspective? That's part of why we saw, or is that potentially relevant, potentially not?
Yeah, I think last year, the maximum cold hardness level was about maybe up to minus 22, or most of them probably stayed at minus 21. So that's a difference we're seeing. This year, we're seeing better number, like minus 23. Yeah. So a couple of degrees difference.
Yeah, which could be significant. Obviously, maybe a little less so this year. But do you think any of that had to do with the fact that the plants had a longer acclimation period? Because
Definitely.
We did.
Yeah, that's one important factor there.
So as we're thinking, and again, as we're trying to think of positive outcomes coming out of this, one of the lessons is there really is a real advantage in terms of hardiness to earlier harvests than from a acclimation, cold hardy, plant hardiness perspective.
Yeah, and they to have a really good cold hardiness, they probably have to accumulate some starch in the woods. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about. Oh, maybe just because last year they are still pushing energy or sugar into the berries, they couldn't really accumulate anything in the woods. So that's a part of reason probably why they couldn't do that. So one hypothesis.
Yeah. One question as well I had, Andy, was just on how big a difference, and Ben, please jump in if you've seen this as well, but I know, Andy, you've done a lot of kind of, not just on vineyards, but other farm sites. I'm curious on temperature variation. Do you ever see significant temperature variations within a site? So one of the questions I'm wondering about is if we're planting or if we're even planning what areas to protect, given vineyards are often on a slope, is there going to be a significant difference potentially between different areas of the vineyard if we have a decent sized slope or anything like that? Or in your work, from your perspective, is that difference fairly minimal?
Well, The general answer is yes, it's extremely variable. Like when you look at during the growing season, where if you measure, say, long-term temperature, those types of things, frost occurrence, everything, you're going to see huge differences between, different parts of the vineyard. And I think every manager knows the parts of their vineyard that are warmer and colder, wetter, and they have to be treated differently. That being said, during the last week, I don't suspect the difference was huge in terms of effects. And Ben can correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's a 2-degree difference between here to here, one corner to the other corner of the vineyard, when it's minus 25 or minus 23 for 12 hours, is that going to make a big difference? You mentioned the 15-minute thing. That's probably, if we would have had a very slight dip type event, like say a spring or fall frost, where it's a little more episodic, maybe an hour, 2 hours, you'd see that difference. But it's sort of like, I guess the threshold was way back there. So it doesn't seem like it would have made a huge difference in this case where, is there going to be differential damage across the vineyard? Yeah, probably, just for other reasons too. But whether it be because of temperature and conditions, I don't know. I'd suspect not.
Probably not. Just like a overwhelmingly cold air is there, and that's like overpass the threshold. Like it doesn't matter what kind of a terrain. Maybe you have a 2-degree Celsius difference, but doesn't matter. It's already way lower than the threshold. Yeah.
But I am curious, and maybe one of you guys can answer this. Is say we're in a period where a week before the event, we know that it's coming. Crystal ball forecast is accurate, saying we're going to drop to minus 25 or minus 23 for a day. What could I do if I know that's coming? Like, I know there's been growers talking about stuff like geotextiles. I'm even aware by Winfield area, one of the growers, this is an orchard, has had a helicopter out to try and circulate the air in case there's an inversion. I don't know if it really worked, but are there other things you could do to save your to minimize the damage? Like if you know it's coming, and whether you have a day or a week or a month notice, and what kind of things are growers thinking about right now in terms of next time this happens?
Yeah, so I'm thinking so in my lab, I probably will try, just like you said, the geotextile fabric things, and then see if I can actually use the heat on the ground to heating up the tiny space inside that fabric. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's something we can try, but yeah. And the other thing, in the earlier season, probably they can maybe use the healing technique, and just try to protect the grafting union. That's the other example. Yeah, but you have to do it before the ground frozen, right? So you probably couldn't say, oh, now we know the cold snap is coming in 2 weeks or 1 week, but the ground probably already been frozen for a while.
Right.
Yeah. So there is a kind of minimum things or practice we can do in this case. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are two, to my mind, like Ben's hitting at, there's kind of two different approaches in terms of the immediate sense of what you can do. Like, what could anyone have done 2 weeks ago? Nothing. You're just, if you don't have the equipment in place now, if you did have geotextiles, previously installed, that's obviously an option. Like Ben's talking about, we've been looking at some thick netting. So one of the funny things to me is we've worked with a French trellising company, and so they have in France this thick netting they use, which still allows spray to get through, but it's like really thick. And then they also have this heated cabling. And I said to them, there's no way we're going to need that here. It's too expensive. And all of a sudden now it's like, well, maybe. So I know in Quebec they use it, in France. Now often it's used for spring frost. But pairing some sort of heating element, you're talking about maybe something from the ground, Ben. I wonder if there's even a natural gas option with some sort of netting or geotextile that's going to trap the heat that'll save you 5 degrees. That's kind of seems to be the rough range I've seen in the data, is that for people it's around 5 degrees. Now, of course, that could be very different at minus 10, minus 20, or minus 30. I don't know how consistent that is. Like you said, there's hilling, but then you really need to build the vineyard for that. And kind of, I think ultimately the crop matters, but I think from a soil perspective too, you're then significantly disturbing the soil.
Yeah.
Right. which again could be totally, if you're saving your crop, there's no question. I'm not, but I think that is just, there are trade-offs with regularly burying your vines where you are really negatively impacting the soil because you're moving a lot of soil to hill it up. And then also you need to plan really for often, your people are lowering their vines and there's other things you're doing.
Right. Logistically, there's so many concerns about that. Yeah,
exactly. And one of the questions I actually had following up on Andy's for you, Ben, just curious with your data, is one of the, we're obviously talking a lot about cold hardy varieties now. If you haven't heard some mention of, hybrids or even the peewee hybrids coming out of Europe. We had a chance to drink some of them in France, which was interesting. But one of my concerns is the trade-off is that obviously you're very often or almost always trading off. If you get more cold hardiness, you're less heat. You're more sensitive to heat. And so I'm just curious with your data or any of your work, have you really seen that, that is where some of the varieties you've looked at, you've very clearly seen that trade-off in the data, or perhaps you disagree?
Well, I in Taiwan, so original from Taiwan, we actually grow the hybrid grapes called Kyoho. That's actually the most planted grapevine in the world. And they're actually doing okay there in a tropical place and a super humid. Yeah. So I don't really have a concern. From what I know, we did have some the heat dome events in Washington when I was there. And I don't really see the Concord grapes, which is another common hybrid grapes there, right? I don't really see difference from vinifera. They're pretty resilient to a certain degree, like 40 should be okay.
So you're saying you're not, from your experience, you don't see that difference. So Concords are obviously very winter hardy, and so they're still do well. You've seen them still do well in heat events.
Yeah. But that's just a few hybrid I've seen. So
yeah. One question also I just wanted to make sure we touched on with you, Ben, was just quickly talking on, obviously this is a podcast, so we're not doing a demonstration, but just on bud dissection and just very quickly prefacing it. Part of the reason I just wanted to make sure to touch on this is we've had a few clients who are very experienced growers, very experienced viticulturalists, and the relationship between their bud dissections and what they've seen and then results have often varied wildly, where some of them have come to me and said, I'm never doing bud dissections again. It's pointless. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Now, are they actually doing a good job? I've had some people tell me you're not actually good at it until you do 1,000 edits in one sitting. So just curious in terms of doing, if there's any just verbal tips you can give just quickly in terms of doing an effective bud dissection or any other thoughts you have.
Yeah, I think the most common mistake while you're doing bud dissection, the first one is, did you leave them in the room temperature long enough to develop that color? Don't rush. Okay, they needed some time in the room temperature to develop those colors. So I would say maybe 20 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. That should be sufficient. So that's the first common mistake. And the other is the depths, how deep you cut. That's the other one. If you cut the buds too deep, you're actually exposing the xylem tissues down below, and looks just always green somehow. They don't really develop too much brown or death color. Yeah. So that's the second one. Yeah. So I'm thinking, maybe sounds like they probably cut too deep. So they're exposing. They basically already remove all those dead tissues, and they're just exposing whatever lies below.
Okay. No, thanks for that. Andy, and please jump in on this one too, Ben, if you have any thoughts. One question as well I wanted to touch on was soil temperature. So one thing I know, Ben, when we had the pruning workshop, you obviously mentioned that we had, generally speaking, you weren't seeing, at least in the data you were looking at, soil temperature going below zero. So I actually looked, and in the last 3 days, one of our sites, we have a soil temperature at a client, we hit, I think, -3 at the 10 centimeters and around -2 at 20 centimeters. So, yeah, my question is kind of when we hit these colds, and I know, Andy, you've looked at lots of soil moisture, or soil temperature, apologies. Is there anything we can kind of expect in terms of correlation, with we got snow on the ground in terms of that temperature? And then Ben, in terms of roots, and again, if you have any comments there as well, when we should start to get worried about root damage.
Yeah, I definitely can't speak to the physiological side. I'll leave that to Ben. But yeah, with soil temperature, probably a lot of it is going to depend site by site. Generally, if there's snow cover, that's going to make a huge difference, just because it provides that insulation layer that the temperatures or the soil temperatures, they're just not going to be as extreme. So probably anywhere that did have a bit of snow cover, it's going to be more moderate. With the snow coming right now, probably that'll, I guess maybe it's a little bit late, but there'll be looks like there'll be a lot of snow coming down. Yeah, I guess the other thing too, even with soil moisture, that's going to have an effect on the soil temperatures, just because it does affect that thermal transmission. So yeah, just I guess a lot of factors that do influence it, but certainly when you have a prolonged period with these low temperatures, that soil temperature is going to drop a fair bit, and get a little bit deeper than it normally would, I think.
And I can talk about the threshold that kill the roots. Usually, they don't really acclimate or deacclimate doing anything there. Just a constant, maybe -5 to -7 degree. That's where you have to worry about the temperature might kill the roots.
Yeah. And is there any sense? I'm just thinking, if we're, someone doesn't have a soil moisture sensor, that they can look at this data and just kind of planning, if we're kind of thinking we have a kind of a normal level of snowfall, is there any point at which we have any sense of what the relationship between air temperature and soil temperature would be? Or is that just, there's just too many variables and we can't really guess without looking at actual data?
My experience is there are just a lot of variables that it is really going to depend. Even just a little bit of mulch or something is going to make a big difference compared with bare soil, a very big difference. And then like I said, with snow cover, things like that. So there's probably, it's probably going to be very much of a crapshoot to do it that way. Probably the easiest way is if someone has a handheld, thermometer or probe or something, just to, check a few spots just to see what it looks like. And even if you're doing the surface, if it's, it always, in winter, it always freezes from the top. So if your top few inches are fine, then you can assume that your lower temperatures are going to be not as cold. So it's something to look at. When you say handheld, do you mean if somebody even just has a meat thermometer? Is that what you're? Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Well done. Yeah. I don't know if it has the setting on it. It'll have your steak, your chicken, that type of thing. It probably doesn't have, root mortality, but you get a Sharpie. Were you going to say something, Ben?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
One other question I had as well, and certainly been hearing from people, is what we can expect. So I'll start with Andy here, and Ben, again, please jump in the future. So I think one of the big questions, a huge question, is obviously, we had last year where it got very cold and everyone seemed to think this was just a one-off. We got hit harder this year in a very warm winter, which potentially maybe we were more susceptible. And so I know, obviously, Andy, you spend a lot of time on this. Do we have any sense, a two-part question, is there any sense of what we can expect in terms of having these kind of freak, very cold events? And then B, how confident can we be in those estimations, in those models and predictions? Yeah, it's a loaded one because there's a lot of research, there's a lot of models, and there's a lot of disagreement on it too, just in terms of, what's happening, what are some of the trends. But one thing that is interesting is there seems to be a correlation between the extreme events in terms of cold snaps, prolonged heat domes, droughts, those types of things. They're all those sort of abnormal events that they seem to be getting more common, which is a big thing. But there's also some really interesting research I was just looking at, just in terms of some of the correlations with the Arctic heating. So what's happening is, with the movement of systems, basically they're weaker, they're going slower, they're stalling, which is causing some of these extreme events like the prolonged cold, that type of thing. So there's definitely some evidence showing that, with the warming Arctic latitudes, that the mid latitudes,
it is being affected with these type of events. So it's not necessarily what we want to hear. A lot of people just assume that, well, we're going to have more heat domes, more heat, but at the same time, these cold snaps, they may be more common.
And do you have a sense just how, because I think this is obviously something that's very controversial even within the scientific community. If you're saying that, do you have a sense of how confident, like, is this, obviously this is what the models are suggesting, but if if we're putting a probability on how accurate they are, and obviously which then could lead to a million other different outcomes, but just do you have any sense of confidence in how confident you would be in that statement, or can you not even answer that question?
Well, I probably shouldn't, but it seems like there is evidence, which is something, just to show there are some correlations. Whether that continues or whether things change, that's a little bit up in the air. But I think the fact that there is some of that correlation that's been happening, I think is maybe an indicator that this is what is to come. And we were talking earlier about last year it happened. Was that a 1 in 10 year? Was that a 1 in 20 year? And when these 1 in 20 or 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year events start happening every year, you start to wonder, okay, is it is this becoming normal? So I think that's the big concern in terms of what is normal, and this word that everyone uses, which annoys me, unprecedented, but at the same time, it's we are starting to see things more often, and rare events and that. So it's it's definitely of concern.
I don't know if, and it's fine if you don't. I don't know if you have any comments or on that, Ben, with the work you do. Before I kind of wrap us up, just obviously wanted to be respectful of your guys' time. Is there anything I haven't asked I should have, or is there anything you would like to bring up as we kind of think of, we have vineyards and other farm growers here, obviously grappling with these colds? Is there any information, data, comments that I haven't hit? And maybe I'll start with you, Andy, and then go to you, Ben.
I guess just to throw out the information, fairly hastily a few days ago, you and I, Chris, we put together this report to send out to growers, and I think it was timely and good information. And we got some of Ben's information and the stuff from Summerland. It was kind of a nice, a nice package, and I think a lot of growers appreciated it. We got a very quick subscriber distribution list, which was nice to see. So I think, given that there's been some interest, we'll probably continue to try and put out good information. We won't, I think through the winter, we won't do daily reports, just because when nothing too exciting's happening, we don't want to just send too much. Maybe we'll drop it down to weekly, but during the growing season, I think we can probably have some information sent out, and I guess we'll be looking for input in terms of what growers would like to see, because if it's of use, then we can probably do it. So I guess I'll just throw out that plug.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And we have this government data, and we need to get it out to people. So I think, it's great it's there. And I appreciate your work on that.
I guess the only other piece I'd add to that is, with the existing network, I showed you the map a few minutes ago. If people are listening, then maybe this doesn't apply, but there is a big gap, that Okanagan Falls area, where, and the reason was just, I think, because there was just less tree fruit in some of those areas, but there is a little bit of a gap there. So maybe that's something we can look at filling, just in terms of getting a kind of a complete picture of the whole valley, because the more representation we can get, the better.
So if anyone's listening and has a Davis weather station, get in touch, or
whatever. Yeah, we can figure it out. I do have one that was sent to me, so I just have to work on getting it in.
Perfect.
Yeah, about that, do you take a meters weather station?
Yep, yeah. For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if you got some,
let's talk. To join you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How about you, Ben? Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to make sure we shared?
I will say I really appreciate how fast the people start to working together. Yeah, I'm really happy to see how we shared information over your network or even on the Facebook page. That was amazing. Yeah, I definitely think people are part of the resilience in the system. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you. I mean, you've been very busy. You were at the pruning workshop giving a talk this morning. Now you're here. Maybe as I close this out, I'll just kind of summarize the key findings, and then please just or takeaways, action steps, kind of anything where someone's listening, and then please jump in, either correct me or add on anything I missed. So we have hardiness numbers, and so Ben, you've been sharing from the Summerland Research Center and yours' work, which we'll make sure to append to all of this, but specific varietal hardiness numbers so we can see where they're at, and then the temperatures we hit. In general, -23, obviously very big varietal differences, but we can kind of consider, especially right now with how hardy our plants got, -23 kind of was a threshold. We obviously went quite a bit beyond that. And then in terms of an extended period of at least 6 hours, or for primaries, maybe 8 to 10 for secondaries, at around -18 degrees was also another threshold where we saw a significant bud death. And we hit the point which we expect to see damage to the xylem. And Ben, can you remind me what temperature roughly we would expect that at?
I think for xylem, probably the LT50 of the buds, just minus maybe 3-4 degrees. That would be a kind of like an estimation. But you can find better data or information over Washington State University's their cold hardiness website. Yeah, they do offer those thresholds.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to link to that as well. And just actually a quick comment, just if anyone's listening and doesn't know, Ben, you just want to share what LT50 is, LT10, LT90, just if anyone's listening and wasn't familiar.
Yeah, so those are, so those are the abbreviation for the temperature that will kill. For example, LT10 means the temperature will kill 10% of the bud population. Basically, that's the definition.
Perfect. And then, and so obviously LT50, 50%, and that's where we obviously exceeded potentially LT90, if I remember from your other graph, in a lot of places, including in Summerland, correct?
Yeah.
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 And just one quick note there, just technical note as well, because LT, when Ben's talking about it, he's talking about primary buds. Now in the research, because of how they do the cooling, I learned this from you yesterday, Ben. Because you're cooling it artificially in a freezer, it will quickly kill the primary, secondary, and tertiary. In a live plant, it does have more possibility of using protective mechanisms to ensure the ice crystals don't immediately kill the secondary and tertiary. So there's a slightly higher chance that those will survive. So when we're talking LT, 50, et cetera, we are just talking about the primaries at that stage. Although obviously there is a risk to the secondary. Ben is nodding.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's my hypothesis, though.
Okay.
Yeah, that's still the mechanism still being a mystery. Yeah, we need a more study about those mechanisms.
So we haven't figured everything out yet. That's. Yeah. And then in terms of temperature ranges, giving people a rough idea, Andy shared a map from our government weather stations, where one of the things we saw is obviously we saw a pretty strong temperature gradient north to south, with definitely some pockets, I would say, westward. So obviously Vernon was the coldest, but then getting into Carameos was very cold, the Soyuz being the warmest, and then getting colder as we went north, and then potentially slightly west. So I saw Summerland got decently cold as well. In terms of expectations, obviously we can expect, it sounds like there seems a likelihood to see more of these events with the Arctic mid-latitudes warming up. And then obviously there's a whole question of what do we do about this, which is a whole other discussion we touched on a bit. Is there anything either of you gentlemen that I missed that you wanted to make sure I just rehashed? Children are staring at me and shaking my head. Okay, shaking their head. Well, I'll let you guys say goodbye. I just again want to thank Andy of Peak Hydromet and Ben-Min of Summerland Research Center for sharing with all of us. I really appreciate your guys' time.
Yep. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Ben-Min can be found at the Summerland Research Center website. The easiest way to get there is certainly by Google. You can find a lot of his research and other ongoing work there, as well as he's been posting regularly on the Okanagan Valley Viticulture Facebook page. Thank him for that. And a lot of the past research him and many of his colleagues have done at Washington State as he references in this podcast, can be found online at the Washington State University. We'll include those links in the show notes, but again, anything on quick Google on cold hardiness in Washington State will pull up a lot of those resources, which are well worth checking out. Andy of Peak Hydromet can be found at peakhydromet.com. That last part is HYDROMET.com. If you're interested in any weather stations, soil sensors, environmental monitoring, anything really an agricultural meteorologist could do for you. Andy certainly does great work. We have a huge thanks to both Andy and Ben for joining us today.